Welcome to On Divine Providence from The Guide for the Perplexed by Maimonides, Vegetarian, Part 1 of 2 on Words of Wisdom. Maimonides, also known as Rambam or Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, was a notable medieval Jewish philosopher, astronomer, physician, and intellectual figure. Born into a prominent family in Spain, Maimonides' path eventually led him to Morocco and Palestine until he finally settled in Egypt in Al-Fustat near Cairo. Shortly after moving to Egypt, life-changing events prompted him to start his practice as a physician. It was not long before Maimonides was renowned in the area and became the personal physician to the Sultan Saladin, a famous Muslim military leader. He also tended to other patients, lectured before fellow physicians, and became a leader of the Jewish community, teaching and helping its members. Famous works by Maimonides include Mishneh Torah, a commentary on the Talmud, and The Guide for the Perplexed, philosophical discussions regarding theological matters. A revered pillar of the Jewish world, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon also had a significant influence on some great medieval writers and thinkers such as Baruch Spinoza and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and made an important impact on the medical science archives. Today, we would like to read excerpts from Part 3, Chapters 17 and 18 in Rabbi Moses ben Maimon's book, The Guide for the Perplexed, regarding Divine Providence. Part 3, Chapter 17. My opinion on this principle of divine providence I will now explain to you. I do not rely on demonstrative proof, but on my conception of the spirit of the divine law and the writings of the prophets. It is this: in the lower or sublunary portion of the universe, divine providence does not extend to the individual members of species except in the case of humankind. It is only in this species that the incidents in the existence of the individual beings, their good and evil fortunes, are the result of justice, in accordance with the words, "For all his ways are judgment." Divine providence is connected with divine intellectual influence, and the same beings which are benefited by the latter, so as to become intellectual and to comprehend things comprehensible to rational beings, are also under the control of divine providence, which examines all their deeds in order to reward or punish them. I have been induced to accept this theory by the circumstance that I have not met in any of the prophetical books with a description of God's providence otherwise than in relation to human beings. The prophets even express their surprise that God should take notice of man, who is too little and too unimportant to be worthy of the attention of the Creator. What is man that thou take knowledge of him? What is man that thou art mindful of him? It is clearly expressed in many scriptural passages that God provides for all men and controls all their deeds. For example, he fashions their hearts alike, he considers all their works. For thine eyes are open upon all the ways of the sons of men, to give every one according to his ways. Again, for his eyes are upon the ways of man, and he sees all his goings. In the law, there occur instances of the fact that men are governed by God, and that their actions are examined by him. All that is mentioned of the history of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a perfect proof that divine providence extends to every man individually. The acts of God are, as it were, enumerated, how he provides for every species the necessary food and the means of subsistence. This is clear and plain. Aristotle likewise holds that this kind of providence is necessary and is in actual existence. Alexander also notices this fact in the name of Aristotle, namely, that every species has its nourishment prepared for its individual members. Otherwise, the species would undoubtedly have perished. There is a rule laid down by our sages that it is directly prohibited in the law to cause pain to an animal, and is based on the words, "Why have thou beaten thy donkey?" But the object of this rule is to make us perfect, that we should not assume cruel habits, and that we should not uselessly cause pain to others, that, on the contrary, we should be prepared to show pity and mercy to all living creatures. For he who asks this question must also inquire, why has man alone of all species of animals been endowed with intellect? The answer to this second question must be, according to the three aforementioned theories, it was the will of God, it is the decree of his wisdom, or it is in accordance with the laws of nature. The same answers apply to the first question. Understand thoroughly my theory, that I do not ascribe to God ignorance of anything or any kind of weakness. I hold that divine providence is related and closely connected with the intellect, because providence can only proceed from an intelligent being, from a being that is itself the most perfect intellect. Those creatures, therefore, which receive part of that intellectual influence will become subject to the action of providence in the same proportion as they are acted upon by the intellect. This theory is in accordance with reason and with the teaching of Scripture. Chapter 18. Having shown that of all living beings, humankind alone is directly under the control of divine providence, I will now add the following remarks. It is an established fact that species have no existence except in our own minds. Species and other classes are merely ideas formed in our minds, whilst everything in real existence is an individual object, or an aggregate of individual objects. This being granted, it must further be admitted that the result of the existing divine influence that reaches mankind through the human intellect is identical with individual intellects really in existence. Hence it follows that the greater the share is which a person has obtained of this divine influence, on account of both his physical predisposition and his training, the greater must also be the effect of divine providence upon him, for the action of divine providence is proportional to the endowment of intellect, as has been mentioned above. The relation of divine providence is therefore not the same to all men. The greater the human perfection a person has attained, the greater the benefit he derives from divine providence.
War makers are like gangsters. Treat them like ones.
Blessed viewers, thank you for your company today for Words of Wisdom.